Legendary horror movie director.
One of the most recognizable names in horror.
The king of horror films.
Now available from Harker Press. You know him as the Sultan of Slash, the Guru of Gore, and the Father of Freddy. Now get to know the Soul of Wes Craven. Join biographer Joseph Maddrey, author of Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, and adapting Stephen King, as he delves into the life, career, and soul of legendary master of horror Wes Craven like never before. Featuring rare and newly uncovered photos, the book contains over 80 new interviews with those who knew him best, including friends, family, and colleagues. The book also features new insights into the making of Craven classics like Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Scream, among others. It's all capped off by a special afterword from filmmaker Jonathan Craven. The Soul of Wes Craven. Available now on Amazon in paperback and hardcover. Coming soon to Audible.
Awesome. Hey, welcome to Red River Podcast, episode 100 and whatever. I mean, when are we going to stop using numbers? I don't even know. It's so insignificant. Yeah. Well, who am I, Joe Rogan?
Just for the archives.
Just for the archives, yeah. Today we get to hang out with, I guess, writer, all around just, music, movie, like, how would you describe yourself, Joe?
I'll answer the writer. That works.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we have Joe Maddrey today, and he was introduced to us by a mutual friend, Rob Galuzzo. I know you guys did the Analog Love documentary. I've known Rob for a while, and he's like, you should talk to him because you have the Wes Craven book that you just put out. So, man, you've done a lot of cool stuff, and we talk movies, music, and pop culture. So I feel like that this will be a good conversation as to kind of, to dig through. You have a book called The Soul of Wes Craven, which I want to get to. But before that, the first thing that I noticed that you did was a movie. You wrote Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, but I remember seeing that documentary around the time that I saw maybe like Going to Pieces, like the slasher documentary. Mm-hmm. And I just remember loving it. Like it was one of those documentaries that I would always watch. And so just give me like a rundown, right, of like how you got into this universe.
Nightmares started actually when I was in college, and I was just a big horror nerd. I think I got to my senior year and needed an independent study to graduate on time with a film minor. So I pitched this idea of doing an independent study that was a kind of a history of American horror films. And I was a big enough geek that it was basically a book. I mean, I pitched, let me write a book in a semester, and I did. And I was an English major, so then I graduated, had no idea what I was supposed to do for money. This is kind of this, the story of being a writer.
Yeah.
How do I make a living at this? And I was writing a lot of fiction. All the fiction came back to me, and the nonfiction book on horror films didn't. I sent it out to two different publishers, and one of them said double the length and we'll publish it. So I mean, I was just out of college, and it was like, all right, I guess this is the road I'm going down, because somebody gives a shit, right? So I'm an insecure writer. It's like, yes, if somebody's going to pay attention to that, that's where I'm going to go. And it weirdly sort of turned into a brand. And the documentary, the book came out in 2004. The documentary, somebody optioned the book, and there were a couple of guys out in LA who were going to turn it into a documentary, and they sort of choked. And so I got this call one day, and it was right after I had moved to LA. So this was maybe 2007. A guy called me up who had the rights to the book, and he said, listen, this is probably going to die unless you want to just take it over and do it. And basically I will, he wasn't really going to pay me much, but he was going to cover all the expenses. So it was like, do you want to go out and track all these people down and interview all of your filmmaking heroes and I'll pay for it?
Wow.
Which was a complete no-brainer. It was
Yeah.
intimidating because
Yeah.
it was like, how do I even get in touch with George Romero and John
Sure.
Carpenter? Why would they say yes?
Right.
But
Especially like back then. It's not like you could just like slide into their DMs.
yeah, no, it
The
was, but it worked. I mean, I still kind of marvel at the fact that I got those guys, and
Sure.
the Carpenter thing was huge because Carpenter's sort of notorious for giving crappy interviews.
Yeah.
And and not because he doesn't really want to be there to begin with. And
Right. It really is true. Like he's kind of like, and I love him. I mean,
yeah,
he's just, I mean, he's John
Of
Carpenter,
course.
but like he is just kind of so like nonchalant about his work and like the shit. He's like, yeah, he's like,
well,
whatever.
and everybody's got this gimmick now. I can't remember who just did an interview with him, but it's like everybody now goes, "Oh, if you talk to him about basketball and video games, you're going to get a great interview." But even that is so old hat now that he's just like, "Oh God," I mean, it's just eye
Yeah.
rolling.
Oh, that
So,
was Stephen Colbert, wasn't it? Like where I feel
oh,
like he,
maybe, yeah, I don't know. I don't know who. I can't remember who it was that did that recently. But I just thought, but I don't care what John Carpenter thinks about basketball and video games. Like, I
yeah,
want to know what he thinks about movies.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think maybe because Nightmares, there's a chapter on John Carpenter in the Nightmares book, and I sent him the book. And I think the fact that chapter focused so much on him as a guy who was making kind of secret westerns, that everything was really a western disguised as science fiction or horror. I think that appealed to him. So he thought, oh, I can talk to this guy. We can talk about westerns. And maybe that was what got him. But I remember he tried to back
Mm.
out at the last minute, and because there was something going on with his office, like they were repainting his office. So he called the day before and was like, I can't do it. They're repainting my office, so you can't come here and do the interview. And I went, man, I'm 5 minutes away. Like you can come to my apartment. I will be set up. We will have the lights and like you can walk in and we'll be ready to pull the trigger.
yeah.
And you'll be, I was like, it will be even easier for you to come. It's 5 minutes away. Just come here. And I didn't think he would, but he did. So I actually I interviewed John Carpenter in my apartment.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's, I mean, who would have ever thought, like
Yeah.
loving the shit that we love. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we're just music and movie geeks. And just to have an opportunity like that is wild. And then like the whole, to keep going with this documentary, like the whole, attachment was just the parallels from like American society into like the reflection of like the
Yeah.
horror stuff. So that was a really cool angle because at the end of the day, listen, we could watch the In Search of Darkness movies. There's no theme really. Like I'll just like watch it and just like over and over again
Sure.
because we're essentially watching a playlist of some of our favorite things, like
Yeah.
it's like this like quick summary. So it's like wow, I really
These kind
miss
of films, sorry, I
yeah.
just want to jump in. Like putting together a film like this has got to be to secure all those people to agree to an interview and then pay for the clips. It's probably pretty like how do they secure all that shit? I mean, there must be a
Well,
lot going into that process.
I mean, the whole thing started off the concept originally was to do it as a fair use documentary. So the clips were not paid for, but it
Right.
had to be done, under fair use. So it really was about the kind of narrative and editorial content. It was about how do you frame it, and are you actually saying something new about these works? Are you presenting them in a new context? And I think that's why the guy who wanted to make a fair use documentary, why he optioned the book was because there was a narrative and there
Yeah.
was a
Mm.
context. And it wasn't just, to me personally, the drawback of something like the In Search of Darkness is that it becomes so anecdotal. It's so much material and it's hard to frame a narrative. So you end up just kind of having, you know, chunks of we're going to look at these three movies and then we're going to go on to something completely different. And so it's episodic. And
Yeah.
with the book and the documentary, the Nightmares thing, I really wanted to I wanted to cover everything, but I wanted to have a narrative. I mean, this was just me as an English major too, and having
No,
pitched it as an
but
academic thing, it's like you have to have something that's cohesive and coherent in that way.
but it's like super unique to be honest with you. Like um I didn't really even notice and then just like how non-existent these things are, like
Mm.
in like the world, especially with something like this. So like the correlation and like the parallels were just great. Where so for basically, if I'm talking about In Search of Darkness or anything like that, I could edit a podcast with that in the background just for the visual
Right.
stimulation. This is one of those things that you're actually paying attention to. And I love going through for me, like as far as like horror, because it really went backwards. But for me, and maybe you too, Langan, like Psycho, I feel like was like the beginning of everything, right? Anything that we loved, because later on, like slasher, like the slasher genre to me, maybe just growing up in like the VHS era, that's why it was such a big deal to me, was like everything that I ended up loving. Obviously, you have the Camp Crystal Lake shared on, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Oh,
parallel.
I live in this world for sure.
Oh, good. Yeah, because like to me, like there was Psycho, and then just imagining what it was like in 1968 to watch Night of the Living Dead for the first time. Right. So
Mm.
my girlfriend's mom she's like 70 and like the biggest horror. She's seen everything till this day. We'll talk about Martyrs. She's like, "Oh, that was so good," you know? And she told me like how unique and insane it was to go see Night of the Living Dead, for the first
Yeah.
time. So I love the bullet points that you covered here.
Yeah. I think, it's funny. I wasn't allowed to see horror movies as a kid. You have to go through that phase where you're sneaking them for a while, and so I think I actually discovered horror movies chronologically because the first things that I was allowed to see were the Universal movies, and then it was just working my way forward. And so I kind of did that whole the narrative of nightmares going from, I don't think I don't remember watching any of the silent stuff when I was a kid, but starting with the Universal monsters and then just working, kind of going to my parents, at a certain point and going, well, Psycho isn't even rated, and Night of the Living Dead isn't rated. How bad can they be? They're black and white, and campaigning at a pretty young age for that.
Yeah.
And so, I did kind of go that chronological trajectory through horror movies, which at the time it was like, no, I want to watch the slasher movies,
Yeah.
but I had to kind of
Yeah.
work my way forward. And in hindsight, that's really a gift because it's hard to have seen the newer stuff and then go backwards,
Oh,
uh, you know.
without a doubt. And because that's what I did. So that's a really good point because I started out desensitized.
Yeah,
Langan,
yeah,
Langan, Langan, I know you're more like you do pay homage to like the 70s stuff a lot more than I do. For me,
Yeah.
like, I remember my dad telling the guy at the mom and pop shop, "You see this fucking 8-year-old moron? Let him rent whatever he wants." And I would go and I'm like looking at the mutilator and like pieces
Yeah.
and like
yeah,
literally when I'm telling you,
Looking for
so
boobs.
I must have been like 7 or 8, and like me and my cousins would rent these movies that were just fucking like they would, Friday the 13th was one thing, but once you got into like pieces and all these like really gross
yeah.
fucking movies, I'm like, so
Three on a meat hook.
yeah. But then when
Such
I
a
went
great title.
when I went backwards, I remember watching Black Christmas for the first time in Brooklyn at a place called Nighthawk, and I just thought it was boring. I didn't like it. I didn't connect with it. So that's an interesting point that you made, the
Yeah,
chronological.
yeah, yeah. Well, and then I think it was later for me. I mean, I was probably almost in college when I discovered like Euro horror, and that was so eye-opening, that you could, because they have a kind of anti-narrative quality. They're so impressionistic, and that had a completely different effect on me than watching a film with a narrative. So I mean, just in hindsight, I mean, it's a cliche to be our age and say, well, we had it best because we had like we're the home video generation. But what that did was it forced you to seek things out, and you discovered things on kind of a delay. So you discovered, like batches of movies together. You went into a subgenre. You went into, and I think that pursuit of it really allowed kind of our generation to cultivate horror as kind of an obsession in a way that if everything's available to you, you don't, you like you just
Yeah.
don't bother.
Dead on,
Mm.
right? Because we're that generation. We're both like all three of us roughly the same age. We lived both those, like we
Yeah.
lived going through shit, looking for stuff. And when you
Yeah.
rented that movie, you might have it for 3 days, so you might watch it twice,
Yeah.
Lot.
and now, the beauty, listen, I love the availability of everything from Spotify to, the streams, but just no there is no real attachment. And like, you take out
Yeah.
it in a violent nature is out. Like, now people waited for it. Are they really going to appreciate it at home? I have no idea. They might put it on for 10 minutes and be like, oh, I'm just going to watch something else or I'm going to stare at my phone. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but there's a beauty to both, but man, to really, even to like dip into the analog love universe, the
Yeah.
documentary that you and Rob made, Luzo, there is that beauty once again, man, of going through those cassettes. I love a good playlist now because that's just what it is. That's just
Yeah.
the convenience of like being able to text you a playlist is pretty cool too. But it was fun to have that moment of like getting your cassette decks ready, picking out the song, figuring out how much time you have left. You're like, all right, I got 2 minutes left on this. I need like a 90s a Black Flag song or something like that
Yeah.
on the end.
I still love the playlist thing because to me it's curated, it's still personal. It's like if I'm going to make a play, I mean, if you play by the rules, right? Because it's like if you just some people would create a playlist and they're just like, I'm just going to dump these three albums by the same, artist. And
Yeah.
that's not a playlist. Sorry.
No, you're right.
Mhm.
It's no, it's
Yeah.
it's not. How did you link up with Rob on Analog Love, which is basically just like a love letter to the mixtapes?
Yeah. Well, Rob, how did I meet Rob? I think I met Rob at Jump Cut Cafe, which was sort of the nexus for horror geeks in LA for a while, for a few years there. Um, and he had done the Psycho Legacy documentary, which I knew about, and I had done
Oh
Nightmares.
yeah, yeah.
I think both of those came out around the same time, like 2009, 2010. And so we were kind of in the same orbit. And then a few years later, I met him. We were just sort of acquaintances, and I said, "Hey, we should talk about working on something together." And so I think we met at Jump Cut for lunch one day, and I pitched this idea that I had, which was do a documentary on Stephen King adaptations, film adaptations. And I was all excited. I was all worked up. I'd done all this research. I love Stephen King, and I did kind of my big pitch, did all the talking, and Rob just kind of goes, "Yeah, I don't really want to do that." I mean, it was very, he wasn't impolite about it, but it was very just like,
Yeah,
"No, I don't like that idea at all." And he just said, "Yeah, I'm kind of bored with the horror stuff, and I don't, I'd rather do something different." I just kind of went, "Okay, well, shit, this was pointless. I'm just gonna go home now."
yeah.
Eat my food and left, and went home that day and posted something on Facebook about mixtapes. I can't even remember what it was, but he immediately jumped on that and said, "That's a documentary I want to make. Like, let's make a documentary about mixtapes."
Oh, that's cool. That's great,
So yeah,
right? Yeah.
that
Nice.
was
Because like music is like such a big, like it really is like it's just music and movies, man. Like I wish, I'm still playing a band, so that's where I get my rocks off. But yeah, it's to I couldn't even imagine what it's like to monetize or try to any of these things because it's just like it's so hard to do, like if you
yeah,
if you if you need an oil change, if you need anything fixed, I'm sure that's a lot easier to charge for, but it's like, yeah, let's just
yeah.
do this.
Goes back to
Uh
what I said earlier about being a writer.
yeah.
Try to make a living. I mean, I lucked out actually, where I have a day writing job that actually pays me, but the books, that's
Yeah. Oh,
a
but
whole other thing.
the passion. We're gonna jump into some of those titles because they're really cool. But so what are some of the things that you remember about making the documentary Analog Love? Anything that was just like that sticks in your brain, like like a cool moment, like a cool interview. I know you guys maybe settled on 15 questions that you asked everyone.
Yeah, we did. I mean, Yeah, and I think that was structural, because as a writer, I tend to kind of think in chapters, and so it was like, what are the big, chapters, or the, organizational, because we go out and interview 20 people, and we don't have a whole lot of other footage. We're not shooting a lot of B-roll. We're not shooting weird reenactments or anything. We can't afford a lot of archival, so it becomes just, if this is really mostly talking heads and we're going to juxtapose people, then it has to be, ask a question that people are going to give a passionate answer about, so that then you can cut those different interviews together, and it's people who almost sound like they're sitting, around the table having the same conversation. They're contradicting each other or backing each other up. And so, I mean, I can't even remember what all the questions were. Actually, one of them I remember was the thing about what kind of blank cassette would you buy? What brand? And that was fun because everybody had a different answer, but everybody was so dedicated to their brand.
Mm.
It's been so long, I don't even remember, to be
Yeah,
honest.
no, it's the 90-minute Max L2. That's the goal.
Oh, it's got to be
Oh,
90 minutes.
that's
Yeah.
That's it.
But yeah, stuff like that, just where you can have people answering the same question. They're going to be passionate, but they're,
Were you
and to
familiar with
really,
everyone? Were you
what's that?
familiar with everyone on
Oh, that was all Rob. I mean, Rob really chased people down and knew who he wanted to interview, and him and Buzz went out and did those interviews. I was like the guy who was just, send me the interview and I'll transcribe it and I'll start putting together the script. And then as he would go out and interview other people, it was like, all right, here's where we have plenty of material. Here's where, some sections we need to hit a little harder. Just until we had enough, it was like, yeah, the narrative is there.
Do you have a strong relationship with music? Like you're like a music guy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like I'm just, I was always a big geek. I mean, I had no social grace early in life, and so I mean, I was somebody very much who lived through, watching a lot of movies, listening to music, and reading. And kind of lived in my own head, and for a long time, and yeah, music mixtapes especially was really a way for me, as kind of an insecure, introverted person to, connect. I mean, I probably, like, if I had to point to one reason for making, a personal reason for making the mixtape documentary. I mean, there was this. I moved in seventh grade. My family moved to a new town, and so I was the new kid, and I was an introvert, and I didn't know how to connect with people. And there was this girl who was a year older than me who was really outgoing, and she just started talking to me, and she brought me a mixtape. One day, she had two older brothers who, I think one of them was in college, one of them was out of college. She had inherited their old vinyl collections,
Yeah.
and man, she made a killer mixtape.
Do you remember what was on it?
And well, what was striking about it, I feel like if I were to, it probably wouldn't sound that good if I started going through
Yeah.
the name. Well, it was the boldness of it. It was the fact that she covered so many different genres, and that there were some real deep cuts on there.
Okay.
And I mean, it was just, I mean, stuff like, you know, that she could pick the sort of like the 70s, ballads, but then, would also put like, Slick Rick on there. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it was all over the place. And then put Elvis on there, and just, I mean, it was so.
There is something about that vastness, like for me and Brian up there, like we love music so much that like when someone picks like random ass songs and not the shit that you're like so used to hearing,
Yeah.
like there is that appreciation where you're like, oh, okay. Like, like I know
You could tell they put some thought into it.
Right.
so the playlist that you put on at the end, man, it had the Oingo Boingo song, but
Yeah.
but you took everything like basically from the conversations, right? So this wasn't like
Yes.
something,
Yeah,
yeah,
it was all from the interviews. I mean, it was all songs that people talk, because I mean, when I was transcribing these interviews and listening to them for the first time, because I was hearing it all for the first time on the footage, and every time somebody would mention a song, whether I knew the song or not, I had to then go and look, listen to it.
yeah,
And And man, that was such a great experience. And I was introduced to a lot of stuff that I didn't know because everybody has different taste. And
I loved, I mean to see Red House Painters on
yeah,
I'm like, wow, that's like
but and see, I knew Red House Painters and I love Red House Painters, but that
yeah,
was like that guy, that was like a B-side from a single. And I was
yeah,
like, I have never heard this song
me
before.
neither. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
But
that was awesome.
I loved Catherine Wheel was on there.
Yeah. Oh, I love
Love
that
Um
them.
whole shoegazer
okay,
era.
yeah.
Man, I'm all
Love.
over that.
The
I'm
best.
Yeah.
Chrome is banging.
Yep.
Then the band Can. So I have a friend
Yeah.
TJ.
Awesome.
My boy TJ, who's been on a couple episodes, and like I never listened to Can, and like he like that's like one of his biggest influences when he writes, and
Yeah.
so now I'm like so aware. Anytime I see that name, I'm like, it's like a '70s like German band or some shit like
Yeah,
that.
I
Like,
don't think I had ever heard of them either.
yeah,
And it was kind of like once you listen to two or three songs, you're like, how is it that I've never heard of this?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And then the last one, just for us Long Island boys, De La Soul,
Yep.
a roller skate
Yeah.
named
I think
Saturday.
the one, it's funny because my daughter is 10 years old now, and she's in a band with three boys who are all older than her. She's the singer.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they're doing like they do Nirvana and the White Stripes and Blink 182 and some fairly a big these are the boys picks,
Classic rock, you know.
but then my daughter can like belt out Adele.
Yeah. Oh,
And
that's
like
great.
she can actually do it. She's pitch
Nice.
perfect, and it's a remarkable thing. And I, to some degree, maybe the mixtape documentary is responsible for that because I was listening to so much music when she was a babe. The first year or two of her life. In fact, the first song that I can remember her, and I don't know how. I mean, it was like within the first year or two of her life, like when you were the beginning stages of consciousness. Her first favorite song was Nth Degree Morningwood, which I think is the first
It
track
is.
on
Yeah.
the Analog Love mix, and so that was her first favorite song, and that was the first time I can like my daughter I can picture as like basically a baby who's like jamming to me like she gets it, and what a cool experience that was, and that is something I didn't I knew the band. I don't didn't remember that song, and so that was that mixtape documentary gave that song to me and a lot of songs to me and my daughter at that moment. And that's what the great thing about music and about mixes in general is how they become the soundtrack for your life.
Yeah,
uh
yeah, absolutely. And you hear things that it's just a way, it's a sampler. It's a great
yeah.
sampler, and you hear if it's curated properly, things that, like for me, anytime, like most people don't know who Portishead is, but if I play
Ah,
Portishead, if I
shame on
play
them.
if I play
I
Portishead,
know.
99% of the time people are like, yo, who is
Yeah.
this? And they
Yeah.
they're blown away by it. But Brian, he's going through the same thing. Like his son just got into playing music, and it's
Yeah.
like at first he did not give a shit about music. Now he's a bass player
No,
shredding.
he's a machine now. But
And
yeah, it's
Yeah.
only been 2 years, but experiencing music with your, if you really love music and your kids, I mean, is it anything better than that, man?
Yeah,
It's
no,
incredible.
it's a great trade-off. And for a long time with my daughter, it was always like introducing her to music, and now it's actually kind of flipped. I mean, we're not completely in
Yeah,
sync, but I mean, she will introduce me to things that I don't know, and I'll be like, wow,
yeah.
that's
yeah.
wild that we've already, she's 10, and I'm like, wow, she's got musical sensibilities. That's that's a really cool thing, and it's one of the great moments in the documentary. I think is
Yeah, yep.
like Chris Carmina and his dad, and his dad
Mm.
making him the mixtape with liner notes. It's not just the mix; it's the liner notes saying, "Here's why I picked this song and what it means to me." I mean, is there a better gift than that? I don't think so.
Oh, I know,
Yeah.
I know. And
It's
nothing makes me respect someone as someone who's like so like obscenely obsessed with music and stuff. When someone can hit me to something,
yeah.
I bow to you. I'm like, yes, we're gonna be cool, man.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
we like everything from the nicest shit to like screaming into a microphone where you're like, are you guys mentally ill right now? We're
I
like, we
know.
like it all. So
Uh,
so let's talk about the
I
book.
did want to
Uh,
before we go to there. I just wanted to circle back because as someone who's done like I like these intellectual studies on horror because they're when I grew up on like the first three Romero film, the Night of the Living Dead, Day and
Yeah.
Dawn. That got me into the world and stuff. So George Romero and those things, but I never got the subtext, the commentary on society and stuff like that. And to do it all later in life and then look back at things, it's like, oh yeah, oh yeah. But let me ask your opinion because Romero has fascinated me because
Mhm.
sometimes he'd be like, Night of the Living Dead, Dwayne was the best actor. We just put him out there. There wasn't anything. And then sometimes he's leaning into, yes, it was, that he knew what he was doing and he made this,
Yeah.
commentary on race and whatever and this and that. What do you think? Like,
Well, I will
yeah.
say that when I was interviewing George and he, I was telling him that Night of the Living Dead had been important, had actually scared me. And part of this was what I was saying earlier about having seen horror films in kind of chronological order.
mhm.
Um, and so I hadn't been exposed to, because he just said, "How is that possible? You're like you grew up in the '80s. What would be scary about Night of the Living Dead?"
Uh,
And he said that to him the only power it had was that it was a reflection of that cultural moment and the chaos of living in America basically in 1968 1969, going from the summer of love to things turning dark really fast, and that was the power that the film had. And outside of that context, if you didn't live through that context, you say, I don't understand how it would be scary. And to me, it's really just about suspension of disbelief, and seeing it at a young, impressionable age and not having been desensitized. And so seeing it and being able to kind of put myself in mentally into a scenario where everything falls apart and you're trapped and you can't take anything for granted. There's no normalcy. Living in chaos. I mean, the whole thing of living in a world where you can't take anything for granted was both terrifying to me and also kind of weirdly, I thought it would be weirdly liberating, like, all right, well, that's one way to cut through the bullshit. People aren't going to just be talking about news, weather, and sports. It's like we're going to have to actually talk about what's important to us in life and have real conversations because, you could be dead 5 minutes from now or have to kill your, zombie, loved one or whatever.
Yeah,
There's a kind of intensity to that. And
sure.
I was able to suspend my disbelief enough to go, wow, what would that experience be like? I don't know that it was like the visceral 1967 black and white gore that made it scary. It was the concept that
Sure.
made it scary for me. And Day of the Dead, actually Day of the Dead's the one that really kind of fucked me up.
That's my
Uh,
favorite.
Yeah.
That
yeah, I
that
mean,
that that's my fucking favorite.
yeah,
And yeah, and I watched it as a double feature with A View to a Kill. But I'll shut up. Go ahead.
yeah. No. Well, I mean, I saw that for the first time. I saw it on home video. It was like right before a really big ice storm where the power went out for like a week. And I just happened to see that movie right before. And everybody's trapped because you can't go anywhere, in an ice storm. You can't drive anywhere.
Man,
And
that's
you're
perfect.
and you have to like rely on the fireplace for heat and everybody's stuck in their house and the phone lines went down and it was just like so what I was just saying about having to kind of imagine what the world is when everything you take for granted is cut off just happened to happen, right
Yeah.
after I watched Day of the Dead. But I also just love I feel like that's a movie I point to. So this is my perfect balance of what horror should be, which is like 95% darkness and 5% light. And
Mm.
the 5% light is so honest and genuine. And for me, the light in that movie is the kind of the conversation in the when they're down in the basement and what's the character, the Haitian guy who's kind of giving his spiel about just leaving everything behind, like leaving all the bullshit behind
Yeah.
and trying to just you know, be kind to each other and take care of each other and just start over and just leave all that other shit behind us. And it's like that really, really kind of resonated for me as like, well, that's the positive side of, of the zombie apocalypse. I mean, it's, it is 95% darkness, but there's also some kind of, humanity, some kind of rise above quality to it that
Sure.
really, and weirdly that 5% makes that movie a kind of comfort food for me. I mean, I can remember at a certain point in my life when I was actually overseas and found a copy of that movie and watched it at a time when I was really kind of, homesick and in sort of a dark place, and watching that movie, and it was just like it was comfort food, man. It was like, and
Yeah.
it's like, what kind of weirdo? Like that's my
Uh,
feel good. That's like my romantic comedy, Day of the
Yeah.
Dead.
yeah.
Like that's my feel good movie.
I was gonna say that
So
that's a
we're
twist
just
I
built
didn't see
different.
coming. But yeah, it's I loved it just because it was so dark and there was no, I always bring up being like 7 and 85 watching Commando and Rambo and all these movies where everything always ends up good, and you watch this movie and you're just like, what the fuck? Like nothing's like there was to me there was
Yeah,
literally no hope whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah,
even if they left this place, where the fuck are they gonna go? And you know, as you get older, certain movies just don't make you feel that way the way that a movie like that did. I always say,
yeah,
like, if it isn't cancer or unemployment, like it's not really that scary to me, but I do appreciate certain things. And later on, there's like certain movies, I brought up Martyrs or other like newer movies where you watch and you're like, wow, this is just fucking
yeah.
brutal. Um, yeah, so the book. You've written a bunch of books, but let's talk about the Wes Craven one right now. So the Soul of Wes Craven, and how did that come about? And I mean, obviously, what a great what a great subject, but there's a lot of cool things that you have in here, interviews with his friends and scripts, right?
Yeah.
That didn't get made and all that stuff. So tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I think I was always going to write a book about Wes Craven, and in fact, Nightmares, the first book, ends with a chapter on Wes Craven. So, the fact that 20 years later I've just put out a book about Wes feels kind of full circle. Um, but he, I don't know, his films, especially the films that he did in the 80s, were really important to me. And he was the first, I think he was the first, must have been the first kind of celebrity filmmaker I ever met in person and at a film festival in Virginia when I was, I think, 15. And went and got him to autograph my VHS copy of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and was like, way too intimidated to actually have a conversation with him. So I feel like I was just biding my time. And until years later, when I felt like I'd done enough homework and kind of had the chops to ask for
Yeah.
that interview. So he was one of the first people that I tried to get an interview with for the Nightmares documentary. And I was living in Studio City, California, and that was where his office was. So I could actually walk to his production office, which I did, and brought a copy of the book and wrote him a letter and was, here's what I'm doing. Here's why I want you to be in this documentary. And the way it worked out, he was, I think the week before I went into his office, he had left for Connecticut and was starting pre-production on My Soul to Take. And
I was just going to
that,
bring that movie up. I
yeah,
like that, but we'll talk about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. Well, he's gone. I mean, that was a movie that had a lot of, turmoil.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's
And
studio stuff, right?
well, I mean, studio stuff, and also the fact that I think it was kind of rushed into production because it was like right at the end of one Hollywood strike, and they were afraid there was going to be another one. So they did like this tiny little window where they were like, we got to get a movie made, and I think he wrote the script really fast, and they put it into production really fast, and then the lead actor dropped out at the last minute or had a health issue, and so had to be replaced at the last minute. So
Did you watch it when it was released?
yeah, oh yeah, I saw it on opening day. It's a Wes Craven movie.
So I didn't.
I was like the only one in the theater, but
Well, I wish I would have been there. So I watched it recently because I think it was on HBO Max.
Hmm.
And I was like, man, this is weird. I'm like, I don't even know this movie. And I watched it and I thought to myself, this is actually pretty fucking good. I just didn't like how I didn't like the third act. I didn't like the ending. But
Yeah.
anyway, I thought it was I enjoyed it. So sorry.
Well, I think it went through a lot of changes. I think there was a lot of rewriting that was happening while they were making it. There were reshoots, there were recuts. So it was just in process for a really long time. And uh, when Wes had finally finished it, had delivered it, I think it was sitting on a shelf at Universal, and he didn't know if they were going to, do anything with it or not. I think there was like a regime change there, and maybe they were just going to kind of scrap it. He really didn't know. But that was when he finally popped up and said, "Hey, all right, I'm free of this movie now. I can do the interview for the documentary,"
Oh, cool.
which happened to be, again, I think literally a week after I had delivered the master of the documentary to the financier. So that ship had sailed, and it was like, well, shit. I tried to get it back. I said, "Listen, this is Wes Craven, and he was one of the first people I went after. I really want to, like, can we get it? Can I get it back? We'll do the interview, we'll recut. I really want him in this documentary." They wouldn't give it back. So he wasn't going to be in the documentary. So I said, well, listen, I want to write a book about you. Can we do the interview anyway? I didn't really have a plan to write a book. That was actually why I was working with Lance Henriksen on his biography at that time. So I kind of had my hands full, but I wasn't going to, pass up the chance to interview Wes. So he said, come to lunch and we'll talk. We ended up having this 2-hour lunch, where, because I wasn't interviewing him for something specific, I really hadn't outlined a book project, and I'd already delivered the documentary. So it was like, I'm not chasing sound bites. So we could just talk. And I think that's probably the reason that I did end up writing a book and wrote the book that I wrote, was because we ended up having this conversation where he kind of started it off almost by interviewing me, where it was like, all right, you asked for this interview, why? What's your interest in my films? What's your, what's your angle? Where are you coming from? And he really wanted to know. And so, I mean, I gave him this whole spiel about how I got into horror and what my childhood was like and all these kind of things. And it turned out that some of the kind of life experiences dovetailed with some of the things that he'd gone through. And we were sort of talking about, I was an English major, and I started talking about kind of my literary sensibilities, and I'd written a book about T.S. Eliot, and it turned out that he had studied T.S. Eliot when he was getting his master's. And so it was just like, we had this overlap. We had a real conversation.
He was a big reader for sure.
Yeah.
Like, and that's where a lot of those stories came from. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
tell you, but
He was a literary guy. I mean, I
yeah.
think that's probably to the thing that appeals to me about Wes, as a big reader and as a writer, was that in a weird sort of way, I think of him as more of a literary figure than as a cinematic figure. He's good at both, but I mean, it really is the fact that he puts so much of his kind of personal experiences and belief system into his stories that makes his work really interesting to me, and makes him an auteur in the way that maybe some of those other guys are not quite as intense about it, because he didn't grow up on films. He grew up on literature, and he was putting these kind of literary ideas and going back to Greco-Roman mythology and all of the kind of early conflicts he had with religion and stuff. That's what he was baking into his stories. So much of himself, and as he put it, he's like, I put a lot of my soul into my films, and that's what makes them my films. They're deeply personal. And so that the challenge of writing the book became about going, kind of trying to pull those elements out and going, why did he tell this story in this way? What is the personal element of it? What was he trying to figure out? What was he trying to say? And so in that way, I was kind of studying him as the way an academic might study a literary figure more than somebody studying a filmmaker.
Does it ever feel like daunting, or like something? I mean, when you tackle like a subject like this with someone that you adore, like Wes, I mean, it's like you're gonna want to grand slam that, right? Like, that's the whole thing. You're like, man, I really want to do the best on this. Like I would imagine it's like such a nerve-wracking thing, to pour like
Yeah.
the love into it.
Well, it became more nerve-wracking. I mean, I thought about, uh, when I finished the book that I did on Lance, and and then we did a graphic novel together. So I really didn't kind of get free and clear to where I could think about another book, I think, until um 2013 or 2014. So I was kind of thinking about doing the biography of Wes then, because I had the interview already. And around that same time, another writer put out a biography of Wes, and I went, well, shit, like, how many can there be? There's really no reason for me to go write another biography right now. So I just kind of, sat on it, and then Wes died, and I thought, well, that's over. Um, because I have the one interview, but I really, I wanted to kind of follow up, and would have loved to actually collaborate with him on a book. I don't know if he would have or not, but I would have pursued it. Um, so time passed, and the thing that made me decide that there was another book about Wes to be written was in late 2019, finishing up another project. I was thinking about what's next, and I went back and listened to the interview with Wes, and he had talked about, when he was in high school, that he wrote a column for the high school newspaper, and then when he was in college, he was the editor of the school literary magazine. And I thought, well, shit, I think he'd said that in other interviews, but nobody had ever kind of chased those things down. So I went, I wonder if I can find that stuff. Because generally speaking, when people would write about Wes, there would be like kind of a one paragraph backstory about, well, he grew up in this sort of, fucked up religious household. And then he made Last House on the Left. And it's like, that was the whole first 30 years of his life.
That's what I remember.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, that's, he was in his early 30s when he made Last House. Like, there's a lot of living that happened there. So, and the fact that he was writing so much years before that, I thought, well, let's see what's there. Let's see if I can find stuff. So not only did I find that stuff, but I also then would get, kind of names of people who were being published alongside him in the same magazines or the same newspaper. And I'd say, well, I wonder if I can find these people. And then COVID came down, and it was like I had nothing but time, trapped at home, like everybody else, and just went, let's get on the internet, see if I can like do some sleuthing and find these people, who went to school with Wes Craven back in the day, and just cold call them and see if they'll talk to me. And they were trapped at home with, COVID times too. So it was like everybody wanted to talk.
Yeah.
And it just,
Yeah.
it was
They
like
sure did.
Oh, yeah.
all of a sudden it's like there's a foundation for a book, and it's all this stuff about Wes that nobody knows. And these people had never been interviewed about Wes, or never really been connected to him before. So they were like, hey, this is cool. And a lot of them hadn't seen his movies, didn't care about the horror stuff, but they were but they were very impressed with him, and very impressed with him, as a storyteller too, which was interesting, and as a kind of a philosopher, and the poetry he wrote, and just as a really serious, really smart guy. Everybody liked him. And even though they hadn't seen the movies, didn't have anything to say about the movies, or were kind of disparaging about the career that he went on to, they were all very enthusiastic and very kind of like, warm in their memories of Wes, and wanted to talk about him. So it was like, it was this great new angle. And the things that I learned about the first 30 years of his life told me things about the movies that I hadn't known before. So then it became, well, now I'm watching this movie in a completely different way, because I know something I didn't know before.
Wow.
And then, yeah, like 100 interviews in, it was like, man, I've got a huge responsibility here to deliver a good book, because there's like 100 people who knew Wes personally, including his closest family members, who are waiting to see what I do and hoping I get it right. So yeah, by the end of it, there was a lot of pressure.
Sure. Well, one thing with horror, there you find there's directors, actors that lean into it, become genre people, embrace that and stuff like that. Wes always, to me anyway, like seemed like he wrestled with that a little bit. Like he wasn't always like gung ho. Like I know he wanted to do other, like he did that Music of the Heart. He's done other stuff outside of it. Even Last House on the Left, he didn't think a lot of people were going to see it, so he went all out. And didn't he have a lot of pushback from family and shit like that? He seemed like they wrestled with like embracing that and not.
Yeah, well, I mean, Last House was an accident, right? He wanted to be a filmmaker, and he was already into his 30s, and he hadn't gone to film school, and he had kind of, I mean, he was competing for jobs with people who were way more qualified. And so it became a, like, you take what you can get.
Right.
And, he knew Sean Cunningham. They worked in the same building, and Wes had worked for him as an editor. And Sean's backers on his previous film said, we want a horror movie. And, Sean went to Wes and said, if you'll write and direct it, you've got the job. And, Wes knew nothing about horror movies. I mean, he hadn't watched horror. Didn't grow up watching movies in general. But he certainly wasn't a horror fan. And he just said, I'm not right for this. How can I do this? And Sean said, I mean, this has been repeated many times. So this is not new information, not a new story. But, Sean said, well, you grew up as a religious fundamentalist, right? Like, just dig those skeletons out of your closet. And so Wes just kind of we went away for Labor Day weekend one year and just wrote the most fucked up thing you can think of. And it turned out
He nailed
that not knowing the horror genre kind of worked in his favor, because he didn't know where the taboos were. He didn't know the lines that he was crossing. It was just like, what's the craziest thing I can think of? And he didn't know kind of what horror movies had been doing before that. So he didn't know how much more extreme Last House was than what had come before. I think he said that while he was writing Last House, or maybe when they were in pre-production of Last House, he went and saw Night of the Living Dead. And that was his first real experience with a horror movie, was seeing that and go, and also being Wes, being really smart guy, going, wow, this is interesting. There is it's kind of a sociological commentary aspect to this movie. It is smart. There's something else going on. It's not just, things jump out and say boo. I mean, it's not just the gore factor. It's not just the gross out factor. It's actually got a brain. And so you can do something like this and have fun and still say something. And so I think he went into Last House with all that, and then got kind of tarred and feathered with the reputation that Last House had, because it's so easy to forget now that Last House was not a horror classic. It was not celebrated. It was kind of reviled, really, when it came out. And I mean, nobody, especially in his personal life, people didn't want to be around him after that. And so it definitely wasn't going to get him any jobs. People just thought, this guy's crazy. We don't want anything to do with this guy. So he had to run from that. And I think for Wes, it wasn't so much, I don't want to be making horror movies. I think it was, I don't want to be making only horror movies, and also I don't want to have to make the same horror movie over and over again. He didn't want to repeat himself. And so, I think there was freedom. The nice thing, and I think one of the reasons I'm a horror fan, is it's a pretty flexible genre. There's a lot of subgenres. There's a lot of different places you can go with it. And there's a lot of freedom within it. And so as long as you're not somebody who says, oh, it's a horror movie, and what you really mean is it's a slasher movie, and that's your definition of a horror movie. I think he was okay making horror movies, but he didn't want to be doing only horror movies. And I think it did become, stifling, especially after Scream, because he thought Scream's going to give me the leverage, the clout to say I want to do other stuff and to be able to do it. And it didn't really do that. And so I think to the end, that was a source of frustration for him. But I don't think it was that he really ever thought, I don't want to be a horror guy. I don't want to be associated with the genre. I think it was just, I don't want this to be, horror is not all that I am.
Right.
I love the Shocker movie.
Yeah.
Because it came around the time that, people, would execute a serial killer, like in the first Power. Shout out to Lou Diamond Phillips. Still waiting for you to do the show. Just, throwing it out there, Lou. But also to tie it back to Lance Henriksen and Brian James, the horror show.
Yeah.
So like when the horror show came out,
which is kind of a Shocker ripoff.
Yeah. Those two things in particular. Man, I just, his movies in the fucking, like you said, the 80s. I mean, we could gush over Nightmare on Elm Street all day long, but past that, People Under the Stairs, like that was huge for me. Like as a kid,
Yeah.
like it was just like, and then even like the ones that I didn't, because Shocker at the end of the day wasn't really that great, but I mean, I could still watch it 100 times. The soundtrack, I think Megadeth is
Yeah.
on there.
Yeah.
Shout
I
out
mean,
Peter
Shocker is a
Berg.
weird. It's a weird movie tonally. Um, and I think People Under the Stairs is a little weird tonally too, but I think that one actually works a little better for me because uh
The kid angle
there's
worked for me because I was like 12 watching it.
yeah, and it's got a kind of a fairy tale quality. I mean, I kind of in a way connect People Under the Stairs with the Hills Have Eyes and this kind of
Yeah.
fairy tales for the apocalypse, was one of Wes's phrases and
And the
Shocker.
performances from those two that were in Twin Peaks,
Yeah.
I
Oh
can't
God.
remember their names,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that one, but it's zany, but it's still super dark. And I think one of the things about Shocker is I think it gets so zany that I
Yeah.
think some of the darkness gets kind of bled out of it, and you're just like, this is just kind of a crazy movie. It's fun, but
Sure.
it's hard to take it seriously at kind of any point.
Yeah. No,
And
you're
I remember somebody, Wes's stepdaughter told me an interesting anecdote. She said at the end of Wes's life, they were watching all of his movies, that they were kind of going through his movies, watching them one by one together.
oh, that's awesome.
And she said that they got to The People Under the Stairs, which was her favorite. She said, I was just laughing my ass off through that movie. And Wes was kind of looking at me like he couldn't tell, like, are you laughing with the movie or are you laughing at the movie? And she was like, no, I'm laughing with the movie. This is great. I really like this. And so then he kind of loosened up and he said, yeah, that was the first movie that I made when I got on Prozac. And I think that's where the fun comes from. But
Yeah.
I think that's not true. I think he was at least in post. Like I think Shocker had to be a Prozac movie because that just feels
Yeah.
like just kind of balls to the wall. Like we're just going for it. We're just going all out. Like
Man,
it's so just
it,
we're having fun.
yeah, it was the tail end of the 80s. Why not?
Yeah, yeah,
Real quick, you mentioned the Hills Have Eyes. The
yeah,
Hills Have Eyes 2 with the dog flashbacks.
yeah.
He was just like, was that just like a fuck it, like I gotta make something or I gotta make a sequel to this or like
My theory on that one is that Wes in the early part of his career had been really close to Sean Cunningham and Steve Miner, and uh, they were making stuff together, and then they kind of parted ways, and Sean and Steve went off and did the Friday the 13th franchise, and by the time Wes was making Hills 2, I think Friday 3 had already come out. I don't think 4 had come out when he wrote it, but it was like, oh my God, these guys are just carbon copying this very simple, very formulaic hack and slash thing, and they're getting rich off of it. And I think
right.
I think it was almost like with Hills 2, Wes just went, if that's what people want, that's going to make me some money. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna rinse and repeat. So the thing about Hills Have Eyes 2, I just look at it and go, it's a Friday the 13th movie.
Yeah.
Like it's very, it's silly and it's formulaic and the kids are dumb and it's I mean, yeah, every now and then he would kind of sneak something in that felt like a Wes Craven
Yeah.
idea, like the thing with like the Cassandra character who's like a blind sort of prophet character. I mean, that was him, like, throwback to Greek mythology. So you're like, yeah, Wes Craven wrote this, but it just felt very kind of paint by numbers for
Yeah.
him. And I mean, I went and actually, I mean, part of the obsessing doing this book was like trying to track down anything and everything. And so I actually at one point tracked down the guy, a British author who had written the novelization of Hills Have Eyes 2, which was around for 30 seconds back in the day, and I think released only in the UK, and tracked him down on somewhere on the internet. I don't even remember how it got to him, but found this guy and said, hey, any chance you have the script because Wes in interviews would always say, well, the script for Hills 2 was better than the film turned out because we ran out of money and the edit was rushed and all this. So I was like, well, I want to read the script. And I figured, well, this guy wrote the novelization, and those back in the day were written before a movie came out. So it's like he wrote it from the script, not from the final film. So I tracked this guy down, and I called him up, and initially he's like, I don't, how long ago that was? It's like and that wasn't. I think he used a pseudonym, so it wasn't his real name wasn't even on the book, so it wasn't like his big claim to fame or anything. So he's kind of like
wasn't his baby.
Yeah, it's like leave me alone. But then like a week goes by, and this guy calls me up, and he's like, I got on the phone with you, and it occurred to me if I still have that shit, this is where it would be. And so he like went to a storage container and went digging, and he's like, I found 3 different drafts of that script, like the original 3 drafts for that script that they were using when they were in pre-production and then when they were shooting it. And I'll send them to you. If you pay for the shipping costs, I'll send them to you. So I'm like, all right, yeah, no problem. Say I'll pay the shipping costs. And so, I went through the scripts, and that was, even the scripts, which were, like Papa Jupiter was in the first draft, and they must have had a thing where they couldn't get the actor back. And so then he wrote the Reaper character to replace Jupiter. And, there were a few other changes. It wasn't really that different. And that made me go, just reading the scripts, I went, yeah, I think he was doing Friday the 13th. And this was never, he wasn't taking this but so seriously. He wanted a payday. And he was like, at that point, he'd been trying to get Elm Street made for like 2 or 3 years. And he just couldn't get the money. And people were like, it's too heady, it's too abstract, it's too out there. This guy in your dreams, people aren't going to believe it's real. You're trying too hard. So I think Hills Have Eyes 2 came about because he was like, I'm going broke. People won't take a chance on the new and different thing. So I'm going to go do this Friday the 13th formula with Hills Have Eyes, which is my franchise. I'm going to take that. I'm going to franchise that, and let's make some money.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty basic. You can't blame him.
Yeah, no, not at all. The two for you, one for me, or whatever. However,
and then luckily, and I think the other reason he made Hills Have Eyes too was like, he hadn't done it. Had been a couple of years since Swamp Thing, and he's like, if you're sitting around and you're not making something, then it looks like maybe your moment has passed in Hollywood.
Sure. Yeah.
And so he said, if I've got something in production, it's more likely that Bob Shaye will be able to raise the money for Elm Street, which is what happened.
All right. So just a couple more things here I wanted to touch on. Man.
Choose carefully what you get me going on, because like you get me talking about Wes Craven and I'll
No, 100%.
Go on and on.
So, all right, just out of curiosity.
Feel free to cut me off.
No, just out of curiosity. No, please. I got band practice at 3. We're good. But so if you were going to do, pick like 2 underrated Wes Craven movies, what would they be?
I think I go back and forth on any given day as far as what I would say my favorite Wes Craven movie is, and I'll always kind of ask people, what era of Wes Craven are you a fan of? Are you the 70s and 80s or a 90s Wes Craven fan? And I'm an 80s guy, so for me it kind of comes down to Elm Street and Serpent and the Rainbow. And I really, I don't even know if I would say that Serpent and the Rainbow is underrated, but man, I love that. I think that some of the cinematic moments in that are some of the most beautiful things that Wes ever put on film. Some of the most kind of haunting imagery that he ever put on film.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
I really love that one. And it's an incredibly smart and very subtle movie, at least up until, the last act. And which was reshoots. I mean, that wasn't his, the third act was there was a test screening and it was too subtle, and we got to have a little more Freddy Krueger in this ending. So they reshot the ending and, took a lot of the subtlety out of it, I think. Yeah. Which had they not redone the ending, I think that would have been a perfect movie in my book.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good, a big child. That's like a movie rental move for me. Like one of those that, and even like when I first watched it, I didn't really understand it because it was kind of like a little bit beyond anything that I was renting at that time. But as time
Yeah.
goes on, I always like link that. Like I felt like I would rent Prince of Darkness and that movie around the same time all the time.
See, if you were to ask me what is the great underrated John Carpenter movie, that would be it. Prince of
Yeah.
Darkness, for sure.
I
Because that was John Carpenter. Like that is so heady for a John Carpenter movie. That's like, a quantum physics horror movie. It's like,
yeah.
oh man, I love
I
it.
I just love seeing the Big Trouble in Little China cast just pop
Yeah,
up. I'm like,
Yeah.
hell yeah, I fucking my boys right there. I love that.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, shit. There's just so much stuff, but I'm gonna ask
I,
you. Go
sorry.
yeah, you because I my
No, I
question
was
is
just
dumb, but go ahead.
okay. I was just gonna say, and the book's up where you buy books. The Soul of Wes Craven. Everybody,
Yeah,
check
it's,
it
I mean,
out.
And
it's
an audio, like I think you're right. The audio thing is coming as well too.
audio. Yeah, Encyclopocalypse is doing the audiobook. I don't think there's a date on that yet, but there will eventually be an audiobook.
Cool.
Great. I
Well,
love audio books. But I also wanted you wrote a couple of books on Stephen King
that's
and
where I was
Yeah,
going. I was going with
okay,
that.
adaptations of his books to the films and stuff. And
yeah.
what which is a hit or miss history and stuff like that.
Oh
What are
yeah.
some highlights of Stephen King films that you think worked, and maybe the ones that you didn't as
I
much?
wait real quick. I was just gonna
Yeah, yeah.
say, am I crazy for thinking Maximum Overdrive is one of the greatest movies ever? But that was me. But
No,
I
I love Maximum Overdrive. I mean, that's yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago, the Egyptian, when I was in LA, the Egyptian played a double feature of Christine and Maximum Overdrive, and man,
oh
that was
killer.
like, yeah, that
What?
was my sweet spot. But so I've done 2 volumes of adapting Stephen King. The first one I covered all the different adaptations of Carrie and Salem's Lot and The Shining, and then the second one was all the movies made out of night shift stories. So technically, I haven't gotten that far into them where I've done the really deep dive and read all the scripts and interviewed the writers and done, uh, so I mean, but the second book I would say is probably revealing, a little bit about my sensibilities because man, did I geek out on both Graveyard Shift and The Mangler, which are 2 movies that are kind of generally considered the worst of Stephen King adaptations. And I really like them both for just how gritty and nasty they get.
Yeah.
And that is not necessarily, and I think this is where the problem is and why a lot of people hate them. It's like people don't think necessarily of gritty and nasty as Stephen King's brand of horror, but those night shift stories are gritty and nasty. I mean, early Stephen King is gritty and nasty and bleak. Like once he was cranking out the novels, I think maybe not Carrie, but Salem's Lot and The Shining, for as dark as they get, have happy endings.
Yeah.
And I think he became his brand as a writer became very much about, well, at the end it's going to work out. With a few exceptions like Cujo, where the kid dies at the end of the book, but not, then they make the movie and Hollywood's like, we can't kill the kid at the end. That's not
Corey Haim,
that's
man.
not the brand. Like
It wasn't Corey Haim. It
yeah,
was
it was the family.
Oh wait, I'm
Danny
sorry.
Pintaro.
Yes.
Danny Pintaro. Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah. Corey Haim was Silver Bullet.
That's
Silver
it. That's when I
Bullet.
got twisted.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't kill him either.
So I mean, God, now I've rambled so much. Well, I'm trying to remember what the question was.
I was just asking ones, that your favorites that of King on the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite adaptations are probably the obvious stuff. Although, Christine is really one that just I really love Christine in spite of recognizing the weaknesses of that movie. I just and I can remember when I interviewed John Carpenter for the Nightmares documentary. I can remember maybe hitting this note a little too hard. I was like, oh, I want to talk about Christine, and he just kind of went, there's a job. And I said,
I fucking love Christine. Christine's so good.
Yeah.
That's what I was going, no, I need you to talk. You can't just blow that one off. And he said, some people seem to really like that one. But he was in a tough place. I mean, I think a lot of times for filmmakers or for actors, it's like hard to divorce the finished
Yeah,
product from the experience of making it, the experience of that time.
sure.
And
Oh,
Christine was like kind of what he got as a concession
yeah.
after all the shit he got for making the thing, and then Universal fired him off of Firestarter, which I think he really was kind of revved up to do. And then it was like, oh, all right, I'll do the killer car movie, but I don't think he was ever really feeling it.
Yeah,
But I think that movie to me is really slick. It's so stylish in the way that the best John Carpenter movies are. And I think Keith Gordon is just
He
awesome. I
is the
mean, he just
best.
oh hell
Yeah.
yeah, it's
yeah.
great in that.
That guy can
It's
do
now that I'm
anything.
thinking about it too. It's such a shame, Carpenter did some King, Romero worked with King, and Craven, being a literary man,
Yeah,
never
Craven's
did a King thing. That was
the
the
only
shame.
thing, the only thing that I remember reading I think it was like a interview or some kind of article in Variety, I think right before Elm Street came out. So like Hills Have Eyes 2 era, where the interviewer asked Wes about doing a Stephen King movie, and he was like, shit, I love Stephen King. I've read, I read his books like everybody else. And if somebody were to come to me and they owned a property and said, you want to come direct Stephen King, like sign me up. I
Yeah,
don't, but Stephen King already by that time, I think had a fair amount of pull over who directed his movies. And he makes some pretty disparaging remarks about Wes Craven and Dance Macabre.
really.
Like 70s era Wes Craven, Last House in particular, Last House and Hills of Eyes. Stephen King, not a fan. So that probably, they
Huh.
just, I think they
I didn't
they
know
didn't
that.
they didn't connect.
I had no idea that Wes Craven was attached to Superman 4. That was interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah,
Christopher Reeve, not a Wes Craven fan.
because
Chris,
of his work, or they had a bad
he,
interaction.
I know, I don't think. I mean, I haven't heard anything about a bad interaction. I think it was the reputation of Wes. But
Uh,
the rumor, which I believe comes entirely from things that Wes has said, was Christopher Reeve, went to whatever studio that was financing that, and just said Wes Craven will never direct this movie. That
no.
I mean, he was Superman. He had the power to do that. He had veto power, and he vetoed Wes Craven.
Only Menahem
And we know how
Golan.
great that film
Yeah.
turned out.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Wes
I,
might have dodged a bullet on that one.
Yeah,
I
seriously.
I think he definitely did. So in closing here, I just want to say I wanted to ask you a few quick questions here. Best Friday the 13th movie.
uh damn. I feel like I have to give an essay answer to this. I mean,
Yeah.
can you answer this in a
Yeah, so I'm gonna say this.
like,
So you wrote a book with Tom McLaughlin, who we had
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah,
Thanks to COVID.
yeah,
Once again, Brian using the Tom McLaughlin. A lot of people are sitting at home being like, "I'll talk to these idiots."
yeah,
Amy
um,
Steele.
I fucking have to say, he was, yo, how much fun did we have talking to that dude?
yeah.
Like
Tom is great.
he's so fucking like I loved it. And for the longest, I would say 1 through 4, Friday the 13th were pretty cohesive as far as like
Yeah,
if the series ended at 4 and they had 1 through 4, it would have been like, wow, what a really cool like 4 piece you have here. 5 is as I got older, it grew on me.
yeah,
Me too.
As I got older, it grew on me. Arguably the most cinematic boobs of all time, next to Life Force, 100%. But the ridiculousness of just the cast. I mean, it's just like so. I I mean, just like even like that guy yelling "Lana" by the car,
yeah.
listening to Muzak because they probably couldn't afford whatever song. But I will say this: 4 and 6 are in the running. 4 being the more serious of the slasher. 6 just being very like 6 is
Fun.
just so good.
Yeah.
Like somebody said it was like the Monster Squad. I was like, kind of like it was pretty much like that. And the Tommy Jarvis like fucking trilogy, Tom Matthews fucking rules. Um, Everything about that movie was great. I love 7. 8 is on, Takes Manhattan is probably the worst next to Jason X. And I am a Jason Goes to Hell apologist. I
Oh
fucking
no, I can't go.
ah
I was with you. I was with you up until that point.
I know. I'm just throwing it
Sam's
out
gonna
there.
die on this hill.
I am dying on that hill. So, all right, go
But
ahead.
but I think, so much of it's about the initial experience of that movie too, right? It's like 1 through 4 is its own
Yeah,
set.
Mhm.
5, I always kind of felt like was sort of a standalone, and then you have like 6 through 8,
yeah,
and then when it leaves Paramount, then like everything from Jason Goes to Hell on is like its own. It's a separate era, and so for me, and it's purely about age. It's like I feel like my nostalgia for them ends with 8. And so if I'm going to pick a favorite, it's going to
you,
be, from that initial, it's going to be one of the
yeah.
first 8. Although I mean, Jason X, I actually think is a lot of fun.
It
Um,
is.
and I think I probably like the remake more than most people like the remake.
I like the
Uh,
first
I
30
didn't think it
minutes
was
of it.
bad.
I like the first 30 minutes. I thought like the very
yeah.
first set of kids, like the way he was killed, like I was just like, oh, this is cool. Then I felt like it kind of just like floundered into like just like the cliches,
Going
and I
through
was
the
just like,
numbers. Yeah,
I'm like, all
yeah.
right.
How'd you
So, I
feel
mean,
about Freddy versus Jason?
I didn't hate it though. I didn't hate it.
Freddy versus Jason, honestly, I haven't rewatched. I mean, I saw it in the theater on opening day and I've never rewatched it. And
Yeah.
so I don't know what my feelings are now. I mean, however long ago that was, it's like I watched it and I kind of went,
Yeah,
this doesn't feel to me like a Friday the 13th movie or a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. So
Uh,
it's just not my thing. And I think I've become more that guy with horror movies the older I've gotten, where I'm just like, it's fine. It's just not for me.
yeah,
I'm not gonna trash talk anything. It's just like I'm getting
right.
old, and I have a certain type of thing that I want out of a horror movie, and this just isn't
You
it.
know what
But
you like.
I'm not the target audience for anybody anymore. Like people aren't
yeah.
making movies for me. I'm old, so it's like
No, yeah,
I accept that.
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
And I do the same thing. I'm like, yeah, this one isn't for me. I don't
Yeah,
hate it.
yeah. I can go
Uh,
back and rewatch those old ones.
yeah,
No problem. They exist
Mm.
in many different incarnations now, where I could just pop it in, and there's I don't need the new one. So I
I'm
think, yeah.
hoping with the legalities being, I think that's all starting to be resolved,
Well,
or
it
maybe
sounded like,
not, or that TV
yeah,
show's now
no,
not happening, I
yeah. I
guess.
think
But
the A24 doing Crystal Lake just died. So I mean, I
yeah,
think it sort of looked like it was going to happen, and now I think it's dead again. So I don't know. It's Tom. I don't know when you interviewed him. Did he talk about the Friday the 13th script that he's written, the new one?
nah, I think he
He
did. He
he
said he wrote a sequel to 6, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's a sequel to say it's called Jason Never Dies. And so, obviously it's a play off of Jason Lives. It's just like, well, we're gonna revisit, but it's got a kind of a grindhouse quality to it. And it's different in a lot of ways. And Tom's an eccentric kind of twisted guy. And so
yeah,
it's fun. And I would love to see, I think one of the hardest, even if they could work out the who has the story rights and who's getting paid and all that stuff, I still feel like at this point, especially as long as it's been since the last movie, they almost have somebody has to like greenlight 3 or 4 of them and say you're going to get like 3 or 4 different takes, because any one take alone isn't going to satisfy people who've been waiting this long. So they should do a series or a couple of standalone films and just try some different things. And I would love to see Tom's
and here comes
one of those.
David Gordon Green answer the call.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Hey, I'll die on that Halloween Ends hill right now. Don't make me, because I will.
What about
Did
that
you?
Exorcist Hill? Would you die on that one?
I
No,
did.
no.
I didn't even. I haven't even gone to the Exorcist Hill
Yeah,
yet, so
It's atrocious. I
it
mean,
didn't.
don't even try.
Yeah.
I did not.
Again, not for me, right? It's just.
It's not for
Um,
anyone.
So
so
I've dodged this question, but I want
oh
to.
yeah, yeah. Here we go. Yeah, you didn't
Sorry,
answer it
I
sorry.
will.
correctly.
I
Yes.
will probably, if I'm going to pick one from the first 4 today, and it probably would change, because I think there have been times when any of those I would have been my pick. But I just watched actually 1 and 2 with my wife, who had never seen a Friday the 13th movie before. in spite of being married to me. We watched 1 and 2, and I have to say 2 I really enjoy. Like Jenny,
Yeah.
maybe my new favorite final girl in a Friday
She's
the 13th
yeah.
movie. Like
We're gonna hurt things to
because
come
she
with
was
too.
smart. She was smart. She was psychoanalyzing Jason. I'm like, damn, this is great.
Yeah, we had her on and we talked about Walk Like a Man. Like we want to
That's
talk about
right.
things. But yo,
Yep.
so 2 had a great ending. Also the beginning of 2, when Adrian gets it, like
Yeah.
that's fucking pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I thought that was like super effective, and then the ending, which is like,
Yeah. The
the
window.
it's
Sure.
Yeah.
it's really good. So all right, number
Yeah,
2.
no, it works.
You
I
hit
love the ending of all, as I love the coming out of the lake in part 3. And I
3.
think I always kind of love the audaciousness of part 3, just like how, I mean, it's just crazy.
Well,
And
Yeah.
in 3, when she's on that boat and she wakes up and you see him
yeah,
in the
in the
window.
window, and then
That's a
mom. Yeah.
horrifying, yeah, like that's really effective because he's so
Yeah.
hideous looking, and he might be the most intimidating Jason. The way
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
built, like he's just like you're like, oh, this dude looks like he's works out, did
Yeah.
10 years in like San Quentin or something.
Yeah. Who's that 3 is that Richard Brooker?
I don't even
Those
know.
3. Yeah.
Yeah, Chef.
I'm going back, like, for the most part, I've done like a big data dump on horror trivia from
Yeah.
when I used to do horror trivia a lot, but like I think I could still name the Jason.
Yo, we have a diner over here.
Oh yeah.
When we first moved to West Babylon, New York, and I looked and it was like Stephen Dash, and I was like, "Yo, why the fuck is there a picture of Stephen?" Like it was just random, some like Greek diner
Yeah.
on Long Island, and he was there and autographed it. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is my town from now on."
Yeah, no, somebody saw him. There's Friday the 13th fans everywhere, and if you're a Friday
Yeah.
the 13th fan, you're serious. You're diehard.
Sure.
So, all right. So I'm gonna end it with 2 music questions. 3 songs that you would normally put on a mixtape in the 90s.
Oh man. Um, it's one of
Or
the things that pops into mind, but because you brought up earlier, the thing of having to find something short that fits at the end of the tape.
yep.
So that the Bronny Orr instrumental Led Zeppelin thing that is like, it's like 2 minutes and 9 seconds or something.
So
Uh,
good.
that was always at the end of things, because it was just like that. It was to find something that was that short. Uh, I feel like was always kind of a side ender. Um, God, I don't know, things that I don't know that there were, because I would exchange mixtapes with the same people. Um, I didn't tend to repeat things a lot. I would say that, well, all right, so 2 artists that come to mind, like there was probably anytime I made a mixtape, there was almost always a Massive Attack song on there.
Killer.
And then there was almost always a DJ Shadow introducing song
Oh,
on
all
there.
right, man. You're
Yeah.
you're at the right place.
Yeah. I
Beautiful.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
No wonder you got when I said Portishead, I was like, oh, he knows who that is.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. Oh yeah.
guy. Because a
Yeah.
lot of, I just picked the first thing that popped in my head.
Yeah.
And
A lot
last
of
question.
Underworld too. I got very kind of into the
Yeah,
early days of electronic. Like Underworld was a big,
that's
big
Langan.
thing.
Did you?
Yeah. I love Underworld.
Me too.
They're the Dark and Long and the Train Spotting
Yeah.
movie
Oh
is
yeah.
still haunts me.
We
Yep.
Yeah.
talked about, so the last episode we did was a Lollapalooza episode, and we
Mhm.
talked about the electronic influence of '97. Like everything that they tried out when it was like popping.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's kind of easy to forget now. Some of that stuff sounds pretty dated now, but it's kind of easy to forget that there was like a little moment where electronic music was going to take over the world.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Like the
It,
I
late
said,
night.
I
There
said,
was a few
I
years
said the
where
spawn.
that
I said
was
the
it
Spawn
still did
soundtrack.
it in a way because it
in
filtered
England.
into like every car commercial you heard had some drum
Well,
and bass in it, or that it filtered into like little
yeah,
parts
yeah,
of
yeah. No,
society, you know?
you're right. You're right.
Yeah. Where you were like, wait, why am I seeing Apex Twin on MTV or like Chemical Brothers? You're like, all right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there was a period there, and I think it did take over. I ended up I was in London in the summer of 2000 and the summer of 2001 for the whole summer, and one of my favorite things about it was just like anywhere you went, it was just continuous electronic music. Like just it was just
Mm,
background noise for anywhere you went. And I loved that. And so I think actually in the UK, like electronic music did take over the world. It just didn't here.
sure. Yeah, I
Um,
was a big jungle drum and bass fan, which is like their hip hop over there, but
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah,
it
that kind of
never quite like came over here like full on,
I
you
think
know.
like Tricky and like that
yep.
was as close as they got. But all right,
Mm,
so last question. Our buddy Rob Galuzzo said, "Hey, one thing about Joe is
Uh-oh. I'm nervous.
no." He's like I'm a big Nirvana guy, he's a big Pearl Jam guy, right? Is this true?
Yeah. Well, I think the conversation that we had, one of the conversations we had, was trying to figure out what the questions were to ask uh people to get into the into the mixtape documentary. I think initially it was like, well, the older this is kind of a Gen X oriented documentary. This is a Gen X oriented story. Mixtapes is a Gen X oriented phenomenon. Boomers, the big question is like Stones versus the Beatles.
Yeah,
Which side do you fall on? And so we just kind of, well, what is the debate here? And we were like, well, it's Nirvana Pearl Jam because it was the same moment. And I sort of feel like most people at that time just liked both, but I think there is a difference if you were really like a punk person versus a classic rock person. And if you were kind of a punk new wave person, you maybe went a little, well, not new wave. If you were a punk person, you went towards Nirvana if you
absolutely.
bought into that.
Yeah,
And I think, if you grew up where you guys grew up and where Rob grew up, I think you couldn't not be into punk. And
yeah,
where I grew up, the Willy Wags of Virginia, like you could very easily not get into punk. It was like you were inundated with classic rock and
yeah,
radio rock and all that. And so I think the slightly mellower alternative of the Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots
yeah.
kind of sound was in being less abrasive, felt more natural to me. And there's a kind of melancholy, I think, about it versus about Pearl Jam versus the kind of outright anger of Nirvana. And I was like an introvert, so it's like all of my anger was inwardly directed.
Yeah.
And so we had this conversation about, wow, it's a different, just kind of a slightly different sensibility, even though, if you're there at the same time, like it's not like I'm not, I've got a really good friend, Brian, who is also a really good friend of Rob's, who, if there were going to be some huge debate, the Nirvana versus Pearl Jam, he really should be the guy who fights for Pearl Jam.
Okay.
Because I'm kind of like, yeah, 10, I was, 10 and even verses, really. I was
I
all
was
in.
gonna ask you do you prefer 10 or verses? Because for me, I'm a verses guy.
Yeah, I mean, versus is harder, right? And it's like, I mean, I think I I might say I'm a B side of 10 guy, actually.
Okay.
But A side of versus is pretty fucking great too. So,
Pretty solid. Yeah,
yeah,
very good
in a
answer
different
there.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. You combine both albums right there.
Yeah. So I
That was
cheated. That's how
that
you
yeah.
answer these questions. You cheat.
So no avail for you down there in Virginia, huh?
No, I mean, there was no, I mean, the live music scene when I was a teenager that was local was in Charlottesville, Virginia, and it was this place called Trax. And their big, claim to fame was that was where Dave Matthews started out. So I mean, that tells you I'm coming from a different
Oh
place
yeah.
than
That's
where you're coming from. So
as they say on the internet, say no more, fam.
yeah. You
Uh
know,
Joe, yo, thank you for hanging out with us. Thank you for telling us. I mean, we could have
yeah,
kept you for
man.
another hour. There's a bunch of shit on there. I'll throw up your website and maybe some people fucking check out the book. Wait for
Yes.
the audio, whatever it is. Yeah, but I mean, he did so much cool shit. So anytime,
We'll talk again. We'll do it
yeah,
again.
for sure.
Awesome.
The thing I'll say about the Wes Craven book is just for anybody who knows the name, anybody who, well, here's what I'll say. If you think you know all about Wes Craven, even if you think you know it all, you've watched all the movies, you've read everything that's out there, I promise you, there's like 50% of this book. Well, hopefully you can back me up on this, but I just feel like there's so much new stuff that if you're a fan, this really, to me, has got to be kind of revelatory, because it was revelatory to me. I knew plenty about Wes and his films. And I mean, going out and interviewing 100 people, a lot of whom had never really talked about him before, and finding all these scripts that nobody had dug up before. I mean, I watch his movies and think about him in a completely different way. So,
yeah,
I feel good about the book because I feel like this is the book I wanted to read. And to me, that's like where my success is, or the potential success is as a writer, is like, I do these things because it's like, I want to read that book. It doesn't exist. Can I write that book? And, I think I pulled this one off.
yeah, for the details that I read, like online as to what it includes. I mean, it's, once again, just like the Nightmare documentary, like you pull off this angle and, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, man, like I said, all the success in the world. I mean, I'm sure we'll see each other on Facebook real soon. But Joe, man, thanks for hanging with us. And
Thank you.
anytime you want to come back to talk fucking music or movies or whatever, let's do it.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Bye.
Bye.